Marcus Williams, the governor of South Carolina, was shockingly handcuffed in broad daylight for simply waiting outside a cafe. Officer Ryan Caldwell, blinded by routine and bias, treated him like a criminal, ignoring the truth staring him in the face. But thanks to the quick recognition of cafe manager Lily Harris and Marcus's calm assertion of his identity, the situation was immediately corrected. Just wait until you see how this tense encounter unfolded and how dignity and justice ultimately triumphed over prejudice. It was a humid Friday evening in downtown Charleston, the kind of sticky heat that made the air feel almost alive, pressing against skin and clothing alike. Streets buzzed with the soft hum of conversation, the clinking of dishes from nearby restaurants, and the distant wail of a siren that was part of the city's rhythm. Lanterns along King Street cast golden halos over the sidewalk, illuminating the faces of people winding down after a long week. Among them, a man stood quietly, tall and composed, leaning casually against a lamppost outside a bustling cafe. He wore a sharp navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, dark slacks perfectly pressed. His shoes tapped lightly on the pavement as his attention focused on his phone, scrolling through messages with calm, deliberate movements. From the corner of the street, Officer Ryan Caldwell spotted him. Ryan had walked these streets for years and prided himself on being vigilant, noticing everything that seemed even slightly out of place. That evening, the man's casual stance struck him as unusual, not because the man seemed dangerous, but because he lingered without purpose in a high-traffic area. Ryan's mind, sharpened by long hours of patrolling and an ingrained habit of hypervigilance, framed the moment as a potential problem. Without a moment of hesitation, he strode over, his uniform crisp, badge glinting in the golden light. "You're loitering. Step away from the street," Ryan barked, his tone sharp and commanding. The sudden intensity of his voice cut through the soft chatter around the cafe, drawing immediate attention. The man straightened slightly, glancing up from his phone, a flicker of surprise crossing his composed face. "I'm just waiting for a friend," he said calmly, hoping to diffuse the tension. His words were measured, respectful, yet firm, a simple explanation for standing still that should have ended the encounter. But Ryan was not listening. Years of overcautious policing, combined with unexamined assumptions about who belonged where, created a mental filter that ignored reason. He reached out, grabbing the man's arm with a grip that startled both the man and onlookers. He began reciting the standard rites, the words rolling off his tongue with procedural precision, but a noticeable absence of nuance or empathy. Around them, passers-by paused mid-step, glancing at the escalating scene with furrowed brows. A few whispered to one another, disbelief tinging their voices. "Is that really necessary? He's doing nothing wrong." The tension in the air thickened as the man, though restrained, did not resist. His face, a mixture of disbelief and controlled frustration, revealed the first cracks of personal indignation. He had navigated every corridor of power, every challenge, yet here, in plain daylight, He was treated like a problem to be removed rather than a person to be respected. Around them, murmurs grew louder as the crowd began to sense the injustice unfolding. Smartphones were lifted instinctively, capturing the moment with the quiet urgency of witnesses documenting something that didn't feel right. Anger began to build, not just from the gathering crowd, but from the man himself, who felt the sting of humiliation and the weight of unfairness pressing down. He didn't shout, he didn't panic. He simply stood there, tall, composed, a human mirror reflecting the absurdity of the moment. Every second that Ryan held him there, reciting words meant to instill authority, intensified the emotional friction. The cafe's patrons pressed their faces to windows, commuters slowed their pace, and even the distant traffic seemed to pause in the collective gasp of witnessing. Ryan, blinded by his perspective, failed to notice the growing sense of collective outrage around him. To him, he was performing his duty. To everyone else, he was executing a public display of unnecessary force, a rigid enforcement of rules without consideration for reason, context, or humanity. The disparity between authority and fairness, expectation and reality, created a palpable tension that seemed to thrum through the humid evening air. In those moments, anger was no longer a personal feeling. It was a shared emotion, a ripple spreading through the crowd, fueled by shock, disbelief, and the stark unfairness of what was happening in front of everyone's eyes. Even as Ryan continued his routine, unaware of the full significance of who he held, the seeds of emotional upheaval had been planted. The man's quiet indignation, the crowd's growing unease, and the glaring mismatch between authority and justice combined to create an atmosphere charged with moral intensity. This was not a simple encounter. It was the first note in a story of injustice, one that would provoke discomfort, reflection, and eventually transformation. The anger, palpable and unavoidable, hung in the air like the heavy summer humidity, signaling the storm that was only beginning to unfold. Marcus Williams's hands were firmly cuffed behind his back as he was guided toward the patrol car. The metal of the cuffs pressed cold against his wrists, a sharp contrast to the humid Charleston evening. He moved with calm composure, but inside, his mind raced. It wasn't fear that coursed through him. Marcus had spent decades navigating challenges far more complex than this. Instead, it was disbelief, a sharp, heavy weight of irony that settled over him like an unexpected storm. He was being treated as a criminal for doing nothing more than waiting for a friend, standing quietly in the open air. Marcus wasn't just any man caught in a misunderstanding. He was the governor of South Carolina, a black man who had spent his life advocating for justice, equality, and reform. From the halls of the State House to community centers in small towns, he had fought tirelessly against the very patterns of bias that had now ensnared him. And yet here he was, in the back of a squad car, reduced to a suspect in someone else's narrative, an embodiment of a stereotype he had worked so hard to dismantle. The absurdity of the situation stung sharply, each passing moment a reminder that even authority and status could not shield him from the blind spots of systemic prejudice. As the patrol car doors closed, the dim interior offered a small space of isolation from the murmuring crowd outside, yet it amplified the weight of the moment. Ryan Caldwell, oblivious to the true identity of the man in his custody, barked orders and muttered complaints under his breath about troublesome loiterers. Every word struck Marcus like a small hammer, not in physical pain, but in the quiet, gnawing way of injustice. The officer's unquestioning adherence to routine, his inability to see beyond the surface, was not malicious in its intent, but it was deeply injurious. It was a reminder that good intentions could be blind, and that fairness could be lost in a rigid application of authority. Marcus's mind wandered to the years of work he had dedicated to improving the system. Initiatives to promote fair policing, programs to strengthen community trust, legislative efforts aimed at reducing profiling, they all seemed suddenly fragile, almost fragile in the face of a single, unchecked assumption. Here, on a busy street in Charleston, the very structure he had sought to improve now seemed indifferent, even hostile. The personal pain was deep, the sting of irony sharp. His efforts to create justice had not insulated him from the injustices that persisted around him. Around him, the city's rhythm carried on obliviously. Pedestrians paused to glance at the flashing lights, some whispering to one another, puzzled by the scene. Car horns honked distantly, the hum of downtown life continuing as though nothing out of the ordinary were happening. And yet, for Marcus, the moment felt monumental. It wasn't about being noticed, it was about being misjudged. It was about the invisible lines society drew, the assumptions made without thought, and the pain those assumptions inflicted. In the solitude of the squad car, Marcus allowed himself a quiet reflection. The personal embarrassment of being restrained, coupled with the broader awareness of systemic bias, pressed down like the thick evening air. Each heartbeat echoed the injustice. A man who had risen to one of the highest offices in the state, a man entrusted to protect and lead, reduced to a temporary emblem of suspicion. And yet, despite the humiliation, there was a flicker of resolve within him. Pain, Marcus realized, was not the end of the story. It was a signal, a moment that could be transformed, a challenge to confront with clarity, patience, and strategy. As the patrol car idled at the curb, Marcus's gaze remained steady, outward toward the street and inward toward his own sense of dignity. The injustice of the moment was undeniable, and the weight of it heavy. But beneath the sting, beneath the deep personal irony, Marcus understood something vital. The encounter would not define him. It was a moment of pain, yes, but one that could catalyze action, one that could illuminate the fractures in a system he had long sought to mend. Even in restraint, even under the glaring injustice of that Friday evening, Marcus felt the quiet beginnings of a plan forming, not out of retaliation, but out of a determination to restore fairness and accountability. Pain had arrived, sharp and unrelenting, but from it a seed of hope was quietly germinating. The tense energy that had gripped the street suddenly shifted with the sound of rapid footsteps against the pavement. Lily Harris, manager of the bustling cafe nearby, had been watching the unfolding scene from behind the window. She knew the tall, composed man being restrained by Officer Ryan Caldwell. Recognition hit her immediately, sharp and undeniable. Heart racing, she pushed through the gathering crowd and called out, her voice slicing through the ambient chatter, "That's Governor Williams!" The words spread like wildfire. Passers-by froze, exchanging wide-eyed glances as reality began to settle in. Phones that had been discreetly raised now captured the moment with deliberate urgency. Whispers escalated into murmurs, murmurs into audible exclamations. "The governor? Arrested? I can't believe this is happening." The tension that had seemed absolute just seconds before now gave way to a flicker of possibility, a glimmer of hope that what had seemed irreversible might yet be corrected. Ryan Caldwell's movements faltered. His eyes widened behind the reflection of his mirrored sunglasses as he processed the revelation. He had acted according to routine, guided by his perception of duty and past training, unaware of the man's true identity. Now, reality hit like a sudden gust of wind. He froze in place, uncertainty creeping into his rigid posture. Around him, the crowd's energy shifted. No longer just spectators, but witnesses with collective awareness, their shock now a quiet but potent force pressing for accountability. Marcus Williams, still calm despite the humiliation of the arrest, addressed Ryan with measured authority. "Sir," he began, his voice firm but controlled, carrying the weight of his office without arrogance. "I am the governor. You've arrested me without cause." There was no anger in his tone, no raised voice to inflame the situation further. It was simply a statement of truth, a reminder of reason and responsibility. The words, delivered with dignity, acted as a pivot. The oppressive tension of the moment cracked, replaced with a cautious but undeniable sense of hope. Lily Harris moved closer, gesturing for the officers nearby to hold back as she confirmed Marcus's identity. Fellow pedestrians leaned forward, their curiosity now fueled by recognition rather than confusion. Phones captured every detail, from the glint of handcuffs to the calm composure in Marcus's expression, ensuring that the moment would reach far beyond the street itself. The act of documentation became, paradoxically, an ally in restoring fairness. Each frame, each video clip, amplified the sense that injustice was being exposed, that accountability could arrive. Ryan's colleagues, alerted by the unfolding recognition, began to step in, moving to de-escalate the situation. Calm but firm voices replaced the earlier commands. Procedures were paused, questions redirected, and the focus shifted from confrontation to clarity. Even as Ryan grappled with the embarrassment of his mistake, The growing support around Marcus signaled that fairness might yet prevail. The crowd, previously a chorus of quiet concern, now offered visible encouragement, nods, murmurs of agreement, and relieved exclamations. The emotional temperature shifted from anger and tension to cautious optimism. Marcus, in the back of the squad car, now freed from immediate confrontation, allowed a small but noticeable relaxation in his posture. The sting of humiliation had not vanished, but it was mitigated by the clear acknowledgment of truth and justice beginning to take hold. His calm advocacy, reinforced by the witnesses, transformed the scene. Anger, once pervasive, became a catalyst for hope, as both bystanders and those in authority were reminded of the principles that guide fairness and accountability. Even in the midst of a city street still glowing under golden streetlights, the air seemed to lighten, the oppressive weight of injustice giving way to the possibility of restoration. Marcus's steady presence, Lily's quick thinking, and the collective awareness of the crowd combined to form a fragile but potent sense of hope. The incident that had begun with humiliation now held the promise that fairness could be restored, that reason and dignity could prevail even in moments of human error. In that charged, humid evening, hope was no longer abstract. It had become tangible, rising from the crowd, from Marcus's calm composure, and from the undeniable truth that justice, even if delayed, could still be achieved. By the time the squad car doors finally opened, the tension that had gripped the street for nearly an hour seemed to hang suspended in the humid Charleston air. Officer Ryan Caldwell stood frozen for a moment, his face drained of color as the reality of his mistake sank in. He had acted with confidence just moments before, guided by procedure and habit. But now every instinct of authority was replaced by the uncomfortable weight of accountability. Around him, the murmuring crowd had transformed into a palpable presence of shared awareness and quiet insistence that the situation be addressed correctly. Within minutes, the mayor arrived, accompanied by a small contingent of aides and local journalists. Cameras flashed as reporters pressed questions, and news crews began capturing the scene with urgency. Marcus Williams stepped from the car with measured dignity, the handcuffs now removed, his posture unshaken despite the earlier humiliation. He acknowledged the mayor and reporters with a calm nod before turning briefly to the assembled crowd. There was no anger in his gaze, only clarity, focus, and a quiet strength that immediately drew attention. The symbolic weight of the moment was unmistakable. A man of authority, wrongfully restrained, now reclaiming his dignity in full public view. Marcus was released immediately, and the incident quickly gained citywide attention. Social media erupted as videos from bystanders circulated, sparking outrage, debate, and reflection. People shared the footage not merely to criticize an individual, but to shine a light on systemic issues within law enforcement practices. The incident became more than a personal experience. It became a public reckoning, a catalyst that forced citizens and officials alike to confront uncomfortable questions about bias, judgment, and fairness. In the span of hours, what began as a local scene of humiliation had transformed into a moment of accountability with consequences that would ripple far beyond the street corner. For Ryan Caldwell, the aftermath was immediate and consequential. He was suspended, retrained, and publicly reprimanded, a process designed to address both the procedural mistakes and the underlying perceptions that had guided his actions. Though challenging, this response signaled a commitment to reform and reflection, highlighting the importance of proper training and awareness in law enforcement. Ryan, once rigid in his approach, now had the opportunity to learn and grow from a deeply uncomfortable experience, a reminder that mistakes, though serious, can serve as opportunities for improvement when met with accountability and humility. Marcus, for his part, turned the experience into purposeful action. He used the incident to launch a campaign focused on accountability and systemic reform, engaging both the public and law enforcement in conversations about respect, fairness, and the subtleties of implicit bias. He visited precincts, community centers, and schools, sharing his story not as a complaint, but as a teaching moment, emphasizing the value of composure, the power of civility, and the urgent need for systemic change. His advocacy inspired many, from young citizens to seasoned officials, to reflect on their own assumptions and practices. What had begun as a moment of cruel injustice had become a turning point. The city, its residents, and even the officers involved were prompted to reconsider the dynamics of authority, race, and perception in public life. Marcus's resilience and composure had transformed humiliation into triumph. He had not merely endured the situation, he had used it to demonstrate leadership, patience, and moral clarity. Those who witnessed the event, whether firsthand or through media coverage, were left with a powerful reminder of the impact one individual's courage can have when coupled with reason, dignity, and commitment to justice. By nightfall, as the city settled back into its rhythm, the story of the wrongful arrest had already begun to inspire conversations, initiatives, and reflection. Citizens spoke of fairness with renewed awareness. Law enforcement agencies reviewed protocols, and leaders of every kind were reminded of the human dimension behind every interaction. Marcus's experience, marked initially by pain and injustice, had evolved into a moment of triumph, leaving an indelible impression that courage, dignity, and steadfast commitment to principles can transform adversity into a lasting source of inspiration.